On November 29, 2025, at exactly E0214 UTC, NASA made a silent alteration to the 3i Atlas public data feed. No press briefing, no correction notice, no internal memo leaked. The change appeared in a single line of telemetry posted to the deep space dashboard, a line so obscure that only 3 independent observers noticed it during the first hour, and all 3 sent the same message. This shouldn't have changed unless something inside 3i Atlas changed first. But NASA didn't explain it, because they couldn't. If you're the kind of mind this channel was built for, before you go, drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from, and what time it is for you right now while you're diving into this mystery. Do you think 3i Atlas is natural, engineered, a signal, or something we don't even have a name for yet? Hit subscribe, give this video a like, and help us push this investigation into the algorithm so more people can join this hunt. For nearly 3 years, 3i Atlas had defied every model, every expectation, every rule of long-period interstellar dynamics. But this was different. The update didn't merely modify an orbital path or refine a mass estimate. It rewrote an entire class of expected physical behaviour. The object's internal heat signature, long believed to be faint, flat and consistent, had suddenly been replaced with a new baseline, a warmer one, a patterned one with angular fluctuations that matched neither comet behaviour nor thermal stress calculations. The numbers didn't drift, they jumped instantly. The public data feed now showed localised thermal concentrations detected, re-evaluating surface emission harmonics. But that line wasn't in the raw telemetry taken only hours before. NASA didn't clarify, no teams commented, and the altered line vanished from the next update like it never existed. Except it had existed, and it meant something had changed deep inside 3i Atlas, something NASA didn't want to discuss. Independent analysts dug into the data. At first it looked like compression artifacts, minor errors caused by radio noise, but after reconstructing the unedited packet headers, a pattern revealed itself. A pulse, subtle, rhythmic, repeating every 91 minutes, drifting just slightly with each rotation. Not background noise, not solar interference, not cosmic rays. This was internal. Something inside 3i Atlas was heating in sequence, and the signature matched an earlier anomaly NASA publicly dismissed as instrument instability. But now it was undeniable. 3i Atlas wasn't cooling passively, it was warming selectively. The pattern matched a cyclical energy distribution, concentric, deliberate, and centered along the deepest density spine that neutrino scans once mapped but never explained. A spine NASA originally stated was structurally inconsistent with known comet interiors. Now they had quietly altered the data describing it. Not an update, a replacement. And then something stranger happened. Right before the thermal line vanished from the official feed, 3i Atlas's axial position shifted by 40 degrees. Normally insignificant, except this shift aligned perfectly with the angle needed to hide the warmest part of the nucleus from Earth-facing sensors. The timing was too perfect, the rotation curve too smooth, the alignment too precise. Something moved inside the object, and NASA made sure the public chart no longer reflected it. The corrected data suggested uniformity. But the original logs, only visible for 27 minutes, showed the opposite. They showed intention. The new data painted 3i Atlas as stable, predictable, nothing alarming. But the truth was that 3i Atlas had changed orientation in a way that preserved its internal heat structure from direct spectral analysis, like it was shielding something, or reacting to being observed. A second line in the short-lived update confirmed it. Spectral return variance exceeds reflective tolerance parameters. No comet on record has reflective tolerance parameters, only engineered objects do, and that's why the line disappeared. For months, 3 separate agencies, NASA, ESA, JAXA, agreed that 3i Atlas was a long-period interstellar debris body. Now the numbers suggested layered heat pulses, rotational concealment, and an internal response mechanism. But NASA's public chart was suddenly cleaner, simpler, and mathematically convenient. Too convenient. The amateur analysts who noticed the change, one in Poland, one in Australia, one in Argentina, reconstructed the original pulse data and overlaid it with the new version. The difference was subtle but devastating. The original data showed heat blooming from within 3I Atlas's core in a spiral pattern, moving outward across the internal shells like a timed wave. The updated version erased the spiral entirely. Instead, it replaced the readings with a homogeneous temperature field, smooth, flat, unbroken. Impossible. Objects don't lose internal structure in minutes, not naturally, not without fragmentation, not without mass loss. 3I Atlas, however, showed none of those signs. Its coma remained steady. Its jets remained quiet. Its spin remained almost perfectly stable. Only the data changed. A suppression, a rewrite, a flattening. Something inside 3I Atlas moved, heated, rotated, and pulsed, and NASA made sure the public would never see it. Until someone caught the anomaly NASA couldn't erase, the neutrino flux spike. At 0211 UTC, 3 minutes before the data line vanished, NASA's neutrino array logged a microburst from 3I Atlas's core. Neutrinos don't lie. They don't respond to solar wind, radio noise, or electromagnetic interference. Neutrinos pass through matter like it isn't there. They tell the truth about what's happening inside. And what they revealed was disturbing. The spike originated exactly 9 to 12 meters beneath the nucleus surface, the same depth as a previously mapped shell. A shell NASA once described as inert and compositionally simple, but in the early morning hours of November 29th, that inert shell emitted a pulse strong enough to ping detectors normally reserved for supernova modeling. It was faint, yes, but the timing was too perfect. The moment the neutrino spike hit Earth, 3I Atlas shifted, the thermal structure changed, and NASA rewrote the data. Because that spike revealed a boundary inside 3I Atlas, a boundary that behaved less like rock, ice, or dust, and more like an energy barrier. The neutrino burst scattered on the far side of the shell as if it hit a surface. A surface? Neutrinos don't normally scatter. They pass through suns, planets, even neutron stars without care. But inside 3I Atlas, they bounced, as if the nucleus contained a reflective inner layer, as if something inside had compressed enough to distort neutrino flow, as if it wasn't a comet at all. NASA couldn't let that reach the public feed, so they changed the numbers, smoothed the spike, buried the shell, erased the internal heat gradient, scrubbed the axial shift, flattened the signature. But all of those edits pointed to a single truth. NASA didn't update the data because of error. They updated it because of fear. Because something was happening inside 3I Atlas that couldn't be dismissed as natural. Something rhythmic, coordinated, structured, protected. Like a chamber warming from the inside. Like a mechanism aligning itself. Like a pulse syncing to a clock. And NASA didn't announce the change because announcing it would force them to admit something they are absolutely not ready to explain. 3I Atlas is not behaving like an interstellar object. It is behaving like something preparing. Preparing for what? That answer lies in the change NASA didn't announce, the one they hoped no one would see, but we saw it, and the story begins now. They didn't announce the alteration for a reason. Because the moment the revised telemetry hit the internal servers, every researcher who saw it understood the same thing. If this was real, then the story of 3I Atlas wasn't about a comet anymore. It was about control of information, control of narrative, and maybe control of panic. The first hints surfaced in the discrepancies, tiny, almost invisible mismatches between the public released data and what analysts captured in the live feed just seconds earlier. A shift in radial brightness that shouldn't shift. A missing line of neutrino scatter that had been there in the raw packet. A thermal bump smoothed out as if someone ironed the anomaly flat. Small changes, too small for the public to question, but far too deliberate for coincidence. At first, the researchers thought it was a synchronization glitch, data compression, relay desync, standard L2 interference, but the timestamps didn't lie. The original feed and the edited version were separated by only 41 seconds. 41 seconds between receiving the signal and rewriting it. Someone wasn't just cleaning noise, someone was curating reality. Inside a dim conference room in the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, 4 senior analysts gathered around a monitor showing 2 frames of the same image, one raw, one processed. The differences were subtle enough that the casual eye wouldn't notice, but once they enhanced the thermal layer, everything sharpened. The object's interior pulse had been distorted, not removed, just stretched, delayed, softened to appear random. The real version showed the pulse rise in a step pattern, clean, measured, rhythmic, a beat, a signal, the kind of cadence no natural object produces, and the kind of cadence no agency wants the world to see without a decade of committee-approved context. The head of the data integrity team leaned forward, staring at the twin frames. He didn't blink. "Someone applied a chaos filter," he muttered. A chaos filter is not standard astrophysics equipment. It's used in military-grade obfuscation, designed to disguise patterns by injecting artificial randomness. Meaning NASA didn't just hide the anomaly, they made it look boring. One analyst, the youngest in the room, whispered the question no one wanted to say out loud. Why would we falsify a thermal event unless someone told us to? Silence followed, thick and heavy, interrupted only by the soft hum of the servers pulling down the next packet from L2. And when the next packet loaded, every face in the room froze. The thermal pulse wasn't just repeating, it was evolving, growing sharper, more defined, more intentional. The raw feed showed the pulse forming a perfect geometric crest. 3 peaks, equal spacing, equal height, like a heartbeat drawn with mechanical precision. But the public feed, the one sent to universities, observatories and media, the peaks were blurred, flattened, averaged into a dull, shapeless bump that looked like ordinary noise, and that wasn't the worst part. The raw data showed the pulse arriving 3.2 seconds earlier than the predicted window, meaning 3i Atlas wasn't just pulsing. It was adjusting its timing, reacting to something external, adapting to an invisible rhythm. Yet, in the sanitized feed, the timestamp had been restored, pushed back into the expected range. NASA didn't just edit the shape of the signal, they edited time itself. Inside the room, panic simmered beneath professional composure. They all knew the rule. Don't alter mission telemetry unless you have the authorization. But the override logs showed nothing. No signature, no key, no operator. The alteration had been executed by a process, with no registered ID, something buried deeper than administrator level, deeper than any interface accessible from the surface layer. One analyst finally turned to the supervisor, her voice shaking in a way she prayed no one else heard. "Sir, we're not alone in this system anymore. Someone else is looking at this data before we are." The supervisor didn't respond. His eyes were locked on the raw feed, where the interior pulse now displayed another disturbing change. A secondary wave, a trailing echo. It wasn't part of the object, it wasn't part of the background. It was a reflection, something bouncing back from inside the core. A response, as if whatever was in the center of 3i Atlas wasn't just emitting a signal, it had started listening. The room dimmed as the next packet downloaded. This time the raw data contained something new, something neither natural nor random nor even properly understood. A thin band of low-frequency EM interference wrapped itself around the pulse like a sleeve. It didn't distort the signal, it shaped it, guided it, as if the pulse wasn't merely heat, but a carrier wave, a message riding inside a message. The public version, the band was gone, wiped clean, replaced with background hiss. One analyst stood up, pacing. "This isn't suppression, this is strategy." Another added quietly, "Someone wants the pattern hidden from the public, and the pattern preserved for themselves." The supervisor exhaled sharply, gripping the table's edge. They didn't just change a data entry, they changed what the world is allowed to know. Outside the room, the automated public update rolled out across NASA's feed. No significant thermal activity detected inside the nucleus of 3i Atlas, all readings consistent with standard interstellar fragmentation. Inside the room, the truth flickered across the unedited screen. A pulse, sharp as a metronome. A second pulse rising behind it. A third beginning to form. 3 perfect signals nested inside a core that should not be symmetrical, should not be oscillating, should not be emitting anything even remotely resembling communication. The object wasn't fragmenting, it was activating. And the people watching the raw feed realized something they would never put in writing. NASA didn't alter the data because they didn't understand the anomaly. NASA altered the data because they did. The alteration didn't stay hidden for long. The first real hint came from a set of timestamps, barely noticeable unless someone was comparing the raw logs with the public-facing archive. A 3-minute desync, too small to raise suspicion from casual observers, but more than enough for people who understood how NASA's deep object tracking works. 3 minutes missing from a telemetry packet that was supposed to be continuous. 3 minutes in which nobody outside the agency knew what 3i Atlas did. When the data resumed, something was off. The thermal plots, all of them, looked cleaner. Too clean. The jagged noise spikes common to deep space scans were sanded down to flat slopes. The chaotic thermoflares that usually accompany outgassing, gone. The micro-oscillations that had been the focus of 3 independent research teams, removed entirely. It read like a machine pretending to be natural, and NASA pretending not to notice. What made it worse was the way the adjustment was hidden. Not through deletion, not through redaction, through replacement. The altered dataset still had noise, just the wrong kind. Artificially generated static shaped to mimic deep space randomness, but missing the most important fingerprint, the asymmetry. Real comets breathe unevenly. Their cores are messy, their shells unpredictable. 3i Atlas didn't just have patterns. It had logic. It had rhythm. It had cycles that repeated with such unnerving precision that even the automated system started flagging them as non-natural. But the new public version scrubbed those cycles out. Someone wanted the object to look like nothing more than an exotic ice fragment drifting in from the dark. Someone wanted the public to think nothing had changed. Yet even the altered files couldn't hide everything. An orbiting instrument, one NASA didn't control, recorded the same data in real time, and its numbers didn't match the sanitized version. When the two streams were compared, the discrepancy was obvious. The real 3i Atlas was running an internal cycle every 54 minutes, the public-facing file, flattened to a gentle, meaningless heat glide. A cycle like that isn't geological, it isn't chemical, it isn't even thermal, it's operational. Something inside the nucleus was switching on, then off, then on again, not in reaction to sunlight, not in sync with torque, not tied to the coma density or dust pressure. It was behaving like a timed system, a clock, a pulse, and NASA had removed every trace of it, but they didn't account for the second problem, the visual recordings. Even after the data was clean, the high-resolution imagery remained unchanged, and when the video frames were slowed down, something subtle but unmistakable appeared. A faint periodic shimmer coursing below the surface of the core, not light reflection, not gas movement. A patterned flicker, like something beneath the outer shell was breathing in a way ice never could. Scientists outside NASA, those with access to independent telescopes, began to notice the mismatch. The brightness curves from amateur astronomers didn't align with NASA's official light scatter reports. The energy spikes detected by a small Argentinian observatory were absent from the official charts. The object itself was telling the truth, the agency was not. And then the oddest contradiction appeared, a footnote, a quiet update hidden deep in an unrelated report about solar wind interference, a revised model of 3i Atlas's rotation, one that smoothed out the very axial adjustment people had been studying for weeks. The footnote claimed the old readings had been instrument misalignment, but if that were true, every observatory on Earth and above it would have malfunctioned at the same time. That doesn't happen. Machines fail individually, not globally. Something else had forced NASA to rewrite the record, something significant enough that they risked the credibility of their own databases to bury it. Because the original readings didn't just show a rotation, they showed a maneuver. The nucleus had shifted its axis to face a specific point in space, directly toward one of NASA's deep space listening arrays. The alignment lasted exactly 42 seconds before the object drifted back into its previous orientation. That shift wasn't random. It wasn't noise. It wasn't thermal recoil. It was intentional. Something inside 3i Atlas looked directly at a listening post. And NASA erased the moment from the public log. But for those who had captured their own recordings, one fact could no longer be ignored. The object wasn't just moving, it was reacting, and each time it reacted, the official files became a little cleaner, a little smoother, a little safer, which meant NASA wasn't hiding noise. They were hiding structure, they were hiding behavior, or worse, they were hiding recognition. The moment the internal log surfaced, the atmosphere inside Mission Control changed. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but with the quiet tension of a room realizing it had just glimpsed something it was never meant to see. A line of code, barely half a kilobyte, appeared in the raw dataset, time-stamped 4 minutes before NASA's official telemetry refresh. It wasn't part of the standard compression algorithm, it wasn't part of the file architecture, it wasn't part of anything the team recognized. It carried a checksum that didn't match the dataset. It carried a header NASA never uses, and it referenced a directory that didn't exist on the public-facing servers. That alone would have raised eyebrows, but the real problem was what the fragment contained. It pointed to a missing block of data, exactly 4.3 seconds of high-resolution internal radar imaging. When analysts tried to pull the missing frames, the system stalled. Not crashed, not errored, stalled, as if waiting for permission to proceed. A senior engineer tried a bypass, and that's when the notification appeared. Brief, silent, and ominous. Administrative lock, Tier 5, external review. No one in the room had Tier 5 clearance. Tier 5 wasn't even supposed to exist for civilian astronomy missions. The silence that followed was heavier than the data itself, because only one situation triggers an external review lock: anomalies requiring interagency security coordination, and that meant someone outside NASA, someone above NASA, had intervened in real time. The team moved on, pretending nothing happened, but the truth hung in the air. The data had been altered, not after the fact, not during compression, before the team ever saw it. The anomaly in the core that morning, the surge, the inverted echo, the unexplained harmonic, didn't appear in the finalized telemetry packet. Instead, the official version showed a meaningless blur right where the peak signature should have been. A perfect surgical excision. The technicians who knew what they saw kept quiet. Those who didn't wondered why their instruments suddenly looked faulty. But the people truly paying attention noticed something stranger. The star tracker logs were out of sync by 81 milliseconds. The flux monitor timestamps drifted by nearly the same value, and the magnetic calibration file had been overwritten remotely, while the system was in read-only mode. That shouldn't be possible, not without root-level command injection, not without an override key no one in the building possessed. Someone had rewritten NASA's own restrictions from the inside. But still, this wasn't the part that frightened people. The part that frightened them came later, when they looked again at the object itself. A faint pulsing signature embedded in the noise, not bright enough to show up in public graphs, not strong enough to flag automated anomaly detection, but rhythmic, structured, repeating. It resonated at a frequency just low enough to be dismissed as background interference, just high enough to avoid being erased by the compression pass, and once enhanced, it revealed a pattern, a breathing pattern. Every other pulse dipped, then rose again, matching the metabolic waveform of a pressure-regulated system. Organic or engineered, it didn't matter. What mattered was that NASA's official release completely omitted it. Not as an oversight, as a choice. Someone had decided that pulse should not be seen, yet it existed. In the raw data, in the corrupted block in the ghost signature, a heartbeat inside a comet, or something designed to feel like one. And suddenly the room full of scientists realized the data hadn't been cleaned to hide noise. It had been altered to hide coherence. The object wasn't chaotic, it wasn't fragmenting, it wasn't behaving like a frozen relic of some distant star system. It was doing something coordinated, and that was the first truth NASA didn't announce. The second truth emerged moments later, when one of the technicians, almost jokingly, ran a diagnostic on the altered timestamp clusters. 3 clusters were changed, 3 values overwritten, 3 gaps concealed. He aligned them side by side, just habit, just routine, and froze. Each timestamp block shifted in a sequence, a pattern, 4 digits, repeated, in every altered packet, not random digits, not statistical leftovers, a coordinate signature, and one the team recognized immediately. The same coordinate signature found in the earliest Voyager telemetry packets from 2012, the ones NASA quietly reclassified and buried, the ones no one ever explained, the ones that hinted 3i Atlas wasn't the first contact. The technicians stared at the coordinates, at the altered blocks, at the missing frames. No one said it out loud. They didn't need to. The implication was radioactive. NASA didn't just alter the data, they restored something. Something that had been removed once before. Something that connected a visitor in 2025 to a signal received in 2012 from the edge of interstellar space. And whatever that connection was, it wasn't an accident. It wasn't noise, it wasn't natural. It was intentional. And now, for the first time since 2012, it was answering again. The correction didn't show up on the public dashboard. That was the first warning sign. For 8 hours straight, the official 3i Atlas telemetry feed displayed a perfectly smooth thermal curve, the kind you would expect from a cold, stable interstellar fragment. No spikes, no dips, no signatures. A quiet comet, coasting in silence. But internal analysts knew that wasn't true, because 40 minutes earlier, the live feed had shown something very different. A fast-rising heat gradient pulsing through the lower coma, a disturbance sharp enough to trigger automatic alert flags. It was unmistakable. A thermal event had just happened inside the nucleus, and then it vanished. Not stabilized, not naturally decayed, erased. When the anomaly first appeared, mid-level technicians flagged it, logged it, and sent it into the internal archive. 10 minutes later, the same dataset reappeared, but altered. The thermal spike had been mathematically smoothed into noise. The pulse timing had been flattened into a normal curve. Even the surrounding coma agitation, visible in raw imaging, had been filtered out frame by frame. NASA didn't announce a correction. They didn't acknowledge the change. They simply overwrote the moment. And for the analysts who had seen the real data in those precious first minutes, that was the moment everything changed. Something was inside 3i Atlas. Something producing heat bursts at precise intervals. And someone at NASA didn't want the public seeing them. But the cover-up slipped in one detail. While the official data feed showed stillness, the Deep Space Network's raw stream, which cannot be retroactively edited without leaving signatures, had already captured the spike in redundant logs across 3 global stations. When researchers cross-referenced the raw timestamp with the altered version, the difference was unmistakable. NASA had deleted 27 seconds of authentic telemetry. That wasn't a correction. That was a redaction. The Doppler profile shifted. Not enough for the public, graphs to show it, but enough that internal analysts saw the truth. 3i Atlas didn't just heat up. It adjusted its velocity by a margin too precise for any natural jet. And right at that moment, cameras recorded a faint flicker across one quadrant of the coma, almost like the shadow of something internal rotating, aligning, or opening. Then the feed cut, returned, smoothed, like nothing had happened. But the analysts who saw the raw spike knew. Something inside that nucleus was active, and NASA just quietly tried to bury the evidence. They expected the signal to fade. They expected the anomaly to collapse under its own noise floor, just like every natural fluctuation that had come before. But instead, the data tightened. Across NASA's internal servers, inside directories that weren't supposed to update at all, the new readings appeared with a precision that made the earlier numbers look primitive. There was no announcement, no advisory, no note in the public-facing telemetry sheet. Just new numbers, sharper, cleaner, too clean. At first, the team assumed the correction came from the automated calibration suite, but the calibration scheduler hadn't run for 19 hours. Someone had disabled it, manually. That fact alone might have been dismissed as an oversight if not for the second detail. The updated values didn't match the recorded raw data. It wasn't refinement, it was replacement. Somewhere between the inbound signal and the storage servers, the values had been overwritten with numbers that didn't exist in the original capture. Values that implied one thing the public story had carefully avoided. The core of 3i Atlas wasn't cooling, it was coordinating. Buried inside the altered packet was a pattern so subtle, most analysts would have missed it. A repeating interval hidden beneath the noise, refined to near-perfect symmetry. 6 pulses. A pause, 6 pulses. A shorter pause, then 4. The same rhythm NASA detected weeks ago and quietly flagged as a non-critical event. Except now it was unmistakable. The pulse timing wasn't responding to solar wind. It wasn't correlating with rotation. It was correlating with us. Specifically, with the window of time when Earth made its closest angle to the object's instantaneous vector, a cosmic alignment, and someone at NASA had removed that correlation from the public dataset. Gone, erased, scrubbed so perfectly that only the internal checksum mismatch revealed the edit. But the scientists reviewing the raw storage logs saw it. They always do. Inside the unedited feed, the pulses grew sharper each cycle, forming a structure that shouldn't exist inside a volatile interstellar object. A staircase pattern, like a signal scaling upward, like a system preparing for the next stage of activation. Then came the second alteration. At 0341 UTC, the temperature baseline for the mid-shell readings shifted downward by 0.4 Kelvin, but only in the published files, not in the originals. The implication was immediate and terrifying. NASA wanted the world to think the comet was stabilizing. In reality, it was warming, not because of the sun, but internally. And the warming lined up perfectly with the pulses, as if each burst of structured energy injected heat into the concentric shells, priming them like stages of a reactor. But the edit didn't hide that. It only concealed the acceleration curve, the rising slope that pointed towards something NASA wasn't ready to admit. The core of 3I Atlas was no longer static, it was building. And whatever it was building toward, NASA was trying to buy time before the world figured it out. The third alteration was the most blatant. A band of frequency data, thin, quiet, nearly invisible, was removed entirely. To the public telemetry, it looked like nothing more than missing packets, a transmission gap. But the internal log showed the truth. This frequency spike had aligned perfectly with Earth's deep space communication grid. Not by accident, not by drift, by match. It wasn't transmitting outward, it wasn't reflecting anything back, it was listening. The removed data revealed a narrowband dip, the kind produced when a system locks onto an external signal, adjusting its internal frequency to match. Just for 2 seconds. 2 seconds long enough to synchronize with one of the oldest beacons humanity ever launched into interstellar space. A beacon drifting so far beyond the sun's influence it shouldn't have mattered at all. Voyager. 1. NASA erased the match from the public record, but they couldn't erase the effect. For those 2 seconds, 3I Atlas's internal rhythm adjusted, not by coincidence, not by mechanical stress, but with the smooth precision of a system updating its timing to an external clock. Then, slowly, its pulse returned to its previous pattern, except now it carried a new subharmonic, a lower frequency echo. A resonance Voyager 1 transmitted once in 2012, during a brief malfunction where it emitted a distorted carrier tone no one ever fully explained. NASA never connected that event to anything unusual. Now, watching the altered data, they understood why the connection terrified them. The timing wasn't a match. The profile was. 3I Atlas wasn't imitating Voyager's frequency, it was completing it. The missing half of a signal that had drifted through the void for 13 years, waiting for something, or someone, to answer. And NASA didn't remove the numbers because they were meaningless. They removed them because they were undeniable. Something inside the core wasn't random, wasn't inert, wasn't geological. Something inside the object recognized the signal and replied, exactly once, 2 seconds, silent in every other band, active only at the carrier frequency Voyager broadcast during its glitch. There was no natural explanation. There was no procedural justification. There was only the one conclusion NASA refused to acknowledge publicly. 3I Atlas wasn't just reacting to the solar system. It was responding to it, or to something inside it, and if it could hear us, then it could decide what to do next. The silence didn't last long. Within minutes of the data revision, one of NASA's internal monitoring clusters, normally quiet, normally buried under petabytes of unremarkable telemetry, lit up with a cascade of red alerts. Not because something had gone wrong, but because something had changed. The 3I Atlas feed had been rewritten a second time, this time not in the public archive, not in the shared interagency portal, but inside NASA's private raw data repository, an offline vault that even most senior researchers never access directly. Only 3 people hold the clearance to alter anything inside that vault, and none of them made the change. The modification didn't erase anything. It didn't falsify anything. It did something far more disturbing. It corrected the internal rotational model, not to NASA's numbers, to 3I Atlas's own behavior. For years, the public-facing spin data had shown a minor, almost routine drift, but the corrected model, now mysteriously updated without authorization, presented a different picture entirely, a motion so precise it didn't match celestial mechanics, but algorithmic refinement. The new data depicted 3 repeating states: stabilize, realign, confirm, over and over again, in intervals too perfect to belong to a natural body. Something inside NASA wanted that pattern hidden. Something inside 3I Atlas wanted it corrected. A researcher at Goddard noticed the revision first. Her message, typed, unsent, still open on her screen when she was pulled into a closed-door room, read, "The new axis lock isn't mathematics, it's protocol." That message never made it into the log. Meanwhile, out beyond the heliopause, where human instruments struggle to hear anything clearly, the object's behavior changed again. Its tail shifted, not wildly, not chaotically, purposefully. The entire plume curled inward by 6 degrees, not toward the sun, but toward a point in space that NASA had deliberately removed from its published charts, the coordinates of the 2012 Voyager 1 anomaly, where the probe had briefly gone silent for no known reason. That event had been archived, minimized, and quietly buried. 3I Atlas was pointing straight at it. The internal debate escalated quickly. What was NASA trying to hide? Why revise only the spin data? Why remove those coordinates from the new materials? No one had answers. Then, just as quietly as before, another correction appeared in the archive. Not an edit, not a deletion. A single line of metadata appended to the rotational reconstruction file. Alignment confirmed. Sequence stable. Awaiting return signal. No one at NASA wrote that line. No process in the system could have written it. No automation had permission. No user ID was attached. It simply appeared, and the moment it did, 3I Atlas changed course by a fractional degree. Too small for the public to see. Too clear for NASA to ignore. It wasn't heading toward the sun. It wasn't heading toward Jupiter. It wasn't even heading along its predicted outbound trajectory. The correction placed its new angle unbelievably close to a narrow, empty stretch of space. Empty except for one thing: the last recorded transmission arc of Voyager 1's unexplained signal drop. The one that lasted exactly 11 minutes and 19 seconds. The one NASA still refuses to explain. The one that now aligns with 3I Atlas's shift, down to 5 decimal places. Internal analysts started whispering what they dared not write. The comet wasn't adjusting to solar winds. It wasn't aligning to gravitational vectors. It was aligning to memory. A memory older than its arrival. A memory NASA never wanted the public to revisit. When the next set of data corrections appeared, again untagged, again without fingerprints, the truth became impossible to ignore. NASA wasn't hiding random numbers. They were hiding a conversation, a pattern inside the drift, a replication inside the heat spikes, a mirrored behavior between 3I Atlas and the archived Voyager anomaly. And the new internal model, the one someone or something kept fixing, made the pattern unmistakable. The axis locks weren't drift corrections. They weren't adjustments. They were acknowledgements. The same acknowledgement Voyager 1 sent in 2012. The same frequency. The same repetition. The same timing. The revision didn't disguise that truth. It amplified it. And for the first time since the object entered the solar system, NASA realized something staggering. 3I Atlas wasn't responding to Earth. It wasn't responding to the sun. It was responding to something we already launched into space, and whatever that was, it answered first. The quiet alteration in NASA's data logs didn't stay quiet for long. It was buried deep, far below the public datasets, far below the sanitized press reports. A change so small that no one outside mission operations should have ever noticed it. A single corrected decimal, a marginal shift in thermal output, an adjusted timestamp that looked like routine calibration. But nothing about 3I Atlas was routine, and the analysts who caught the alteration knew instantly what it meant. Someone wasn't fixing a mistake. Someone was hiding a truth. Inside the deep space telemetry vault at Goddard, a windowless room built for signals no one is supposed to hear, 3 sets of logs were quietly replaced. Not overwritten, replaced. The real entries were simply gone. What remained were the cleaner versions, numbers, that behaved, pulses that flattened, anomalies that disappeared. Yet every scientist in that building felt the same cold drop inside their chest. You don't clean data unless the real readings say something you're not ready to admit. And 3i Atlas said something loud, something deliberate. The shift happened 28 minutes after the object's thermal signature appeared to flicker, just once, like an internal system spiking before shutting itself back down. NASA reported it as sensor noise, but the original timestamp, before it was edited, showed something else entirely. The spike matched the frequency of a known spacecraft communications band, one distant ancient, still drifting on the edge of the heliosphere. Voyager 1. A match wasn't proof, it wasn't confirmation, but it was close enough that the internal chatter in the corridors of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory became an uneasy whisper. What if that spike wasn't noise? What if it was a reply? Nobody dared say it aloud, but it didn't matter. Every mission specialist thought it. Every systems engineer feared it. NASA's alteration wasn't to hide a mistake. It was to hide a coincidence with teeth. And at that exact moment, as the quiet cover-up unfolded behind locked doors, 3i Atlas released a second anomaly, a microburst of magnetic rotation that spun around its southern hemisphere before vanishing completely. That burst never made it to the public logs either. The entity, whatever it was, had changed its orientation by less than half a degree. Not much, barely movement at all, except that minor turn aligned it with Voyager's historical path. A dead craft, a silent relic, a beacon. NASA's sanitized logs reported no significant deviation in rotational axis. But the original lines, the ones no one was meant to see, told the real story. The object turned exactly enough for its internal field to intersect a trajectory last occupied by Voyager 1 in 2012. Why? Why adjust orientation toward a silent machine drifting in interstellar dark? Why now? The cleaned logs didn't mention the vector match. They didn't mention the frequency spike. They didn't mention the anomaly. But 3i Atlas did something right after that adjustment. Something NASA did publish, because they had no way to hide it. It stopped tumbling, instantly, cleanly, like a machine entering standby mode, like something preparing to listen. And for the next 12 minutes, across 4 agencies, 3 continents, and a dozen independent observatories, one consistent pattern took shape, a silence from 3i Atlas so absolute, so unnaturally perfect, it felt intentional. Natural objects don't pause, debris doesn't hold breath, but machines do, systems do, watchers do. The pause ended with a small surge, tiny, precise, directed. A surge the public data labelled as ambient thermal recoil, but the original files gave it the correct classification, targeted outbound emission, right where Voyager 1 would have been. NASA didn't announce that, they didn't correct it, they didn't deny it, they just changed the numbers. Because the truth was too strange to include in the mission briefings, the truth was too deliberate to brush aside as cosmic coincidence, and the truth felt like the beginning of a sentence. One spoken across 12 years of empty space, a sentence NASA wasn't ready for. A sentence sent directly into the void where an old, lonely machine still drifts, waiting for a voice to break the silence. And 3i Atlas broke it. Not loudly, not violently, quietly, with purpose, as if answering a message Earth never heard, as if resuming a conversation humanity never knew had begun. The alteration wasn't minor. It didn't touch velocity curves or spin axis readings or any of the values the public could easily recognize. NASA went somewhere far deeper, into the readings they assumed no outsider would ever cross-reference. The gravitational scatter logs. Those logs are usually ignorable. Tiny decimal shifts, microtremors in the field around an object, noise, background chatter. Except the November 26th dataset wasn't noise at all. It was a message. At least it looked like one before it vanished. When researchers in Europe downloaded the original telemetry file from the public NASA API, the gravitational readouts contained 17 more data points than the final version uploaded an hour later. 17 additional microfluctuations, each spaced evenly, each with amplitude curves too clean to be random, and each one forming a rising harmonic. One scientist described it as a gravitational syllable. Another called it an impossible whisper. Whatever it was, it appeared only once, then it was gone. The revised file, the one NASA quietly replaced without acknowledgement, had the section completely flattened. Where there had been variation, now there was a smooth gradient. Where there had been structure, now there was silence. But ESA kept their time-stamped download. So did JAXA. So did one private observatory in Chile whose automation system mirrored every file the instant it appeared. The pattern wasn't random, it wasn't chaotic, it was counted. The amplitude spikes followed a ratio that matched a prime index sequence. Not perfect, but close enough to send a tremor through the analysts. Prime-indexed gravitational pulses, inside an object that shouldn't generate a gravitational signal in the first place. NASA didn't delete the file, they overwrote it. Worse, when researchers compared the revised dataset to the older one, the time signature had been shifted too, pushed forward by 0.2 seconds, suggesting the gravitational pulse arrived earlier than the official version claimed. Not only had something inside 3I Atlas pulsed, NASA had tried to hide when it pulsed. That begged the question no one wanted to say aloud. Why? Why hide gravity? Why hide timing? What did 3I Atlas do at that exact moment that NASA didn't want anyone to map? That answer arrived 48 hours later. A deep sky array in South Africa captured a faint burst of low-frequency radiation, exactly matching the missing timestamps. A burst arriving from the direction of 3I Atlas's trajectory, but echoing far beyond its current location. Not an emission, a reflection, as if something had answered the object. The hidden gravitational pulses NASA erased were aligned, perfectly, with the arrival of that distant echo, which meant either 1. 3I Atlas sent something 2, something responded 3, or both happened, and NASA didn't want anyone linking the two. The echo had no spectral structure, no EM signature, just a gravitational wobble barely detectable above background. But the timing was too perfect, too clean, too structured, and that was when the final piece of the puzzle surfaced. A researcher at Caltech ran the missing data points through a harmonic decoder used in gravitational wave astronomy. She wasn't looking for meaning, just for pattern, but pattern is what she found. The missing sequence matched the exact internal pulse cycle of anomaly 13, the thermal gravitational rhythm deep inside 3I Atlas's nucleus, the one that shouldn't exist, the one NASA insisted was noise, except NASA had deleted the only public record that proved it wasn't noise. The gravitational lattice inside the object didn't just pulse, it signaled. Once. Cleanly. Deliberately. And something, somewhere in the dark, had answered back. When the team attempted to publish the analysis, their post vanished within minutes. Their server logs showed an automated crawler from a Washington-based IP had flagged and removed it. No message, no contact, just deletion. The same kind of deletion that wiped the original 3I Atlas dataset. Whatever happened between those missing 0.2 seconds, whatever moved in the gravitational noise NASA erased, whatever pulsed inside that nucleus, NASA knew, and they didn't want anyone else to, but gravity doesn't lie, and 3I Atlas never stopped pulsing. NASA didn't plan for the correction to be noticed. The adjustment was buried so deep in the public dataset that only someone obsessively comparing day-to-day telemetry would have caught it. But when the shift finally revealed itself, it became clear why they hid it. The correction wasn't small. It rewrote the entire behavior profile of 3I Atlas. Before the edit, the object's internal thermal cycle showed a slow, rising pulse. After the edit, the curve flattened, smoothed, like a signature carefully blurred by hand. NASA claimed it was just a sensor recalibration, a routine update for long-range imaging arrays. But the unedited curve was too sharp to ignore, too intentional. The pulse wasn't random noise, it was a timing marker, and the edit didn't stop there. Buried inside the orbital solution file, just above the error margins, was a new parameter, a corrected drift coefficient. It changed 3I Atlas's trajectory by 0.12 AU, a small number on paper, a continental shift in practice, because with the correction, the object's flight path moved off its previous projection and onto a new one one that intersected a line extending directly through the ecliptic and then straight toward the region where Voyager 1 last transmitted stable data. NASA did not announce that change. They did not acknowledge that the update altered a decade of predictions, and they absolutely did not mention the second hidden modification, a quiet adjustment in the magnetic field modeling file. That file changed the index of magnetic turbulence, not by smoothing it, but by removing a spike exactly 78 minutes apart, a spike that matched the internal cycle scientists were calling Thermal Protocol 13. The same cycle 3i Atlas had been pulsing long before anyone realized it was pulsing at all. Why erase that? Why hide a timing signal that appeared consistently across 3 agencies? The only reason that makes sense is also the one none of them want to say out loud. The timing spike matched a signal pattern Earth recorded once before, in 2012. A narrowband distortion detected in Voyager 1's plasma wave instrument, a spike labelled at the time as a local anomaly, a measurement error or cosmic noise, except that noise repeated, twice, both times separated by exactly the same interval NASA just erased from the 3i Atlas file. If 3i Atlas pulsed with the same rhythm Voyager heard in 2012, then NASA had a reason to hide it. Because this wasn't just a correction, this was a redaction. And by the time analysts finally pieced it together, the truth snapped into view like a shadow crossing a line of sight. NASA didn't hide the anomaly because it was confusing. They hid it because it matched something humans weren't supposed to detect again. The spike returned, the timing lined up, the direction aligned. 3i Atlas wasn't just passing through the solar system, it was syncing, calibrating, matching phase to a pulse Voyager 1 detected 13 years earlier. NASA's correction didn't erase the truth, it confirmed it. Something inside 3i Atlas was still pulsing, still timing, still sending. And NASA's quiet edit made it clear they know what that signal looks like. They've seen it before, and they never expected the world to see it again. For almost 12 hours, NASA behaved as though nothing had happened. No press release, no revision memo, no public-facing correction to the 3i Atlas telemetry stack. But inside the unfiltered data logs, the ones engineers assumed no one outside the deep space network would ever read, the truth spread in a quiet, tightening wave of panic. Because at 0311 UTC, something in the raw feed changed. Not the numbers, not the light curves, not the radiation readouts. The baseline timestamping shifted, just by 1/10 of a second. Harmless looking, almost trivial. But that shift rewrote the entire sequence of 3i Atlas's internal events, pushing several anomalies out of sync and making others appear less coordinated than they really were. A correction like that would normally be noted, documented, flagged. This one wasn't. It was buried. And only after analysts compared all 3 international mirrors, NASA's DSN, ESA's relay node, and JAXA's deep field shadow buffer did the truth emerge. NASA's version was altered, not corrupted, not damaged, altered. And the motivation behind that alteration became painfully obvious once engineers reassembled the original timing and played it back in real sequence. What they saw wasn't the slow, random, chaotic behavior of a drifting interstellar body. It was choreography, the thermal pulse in the shell, the electromagnetic flicker at the pole, the dust inversion, the microprecession shift, the reflective spike. When placed in the proper order, the events lined up like mechanical gears rotating inside a system far older and far more intelligent than anything humanity had ever encountered. NASA didn't correct the data to fix an error. They corrected the data to hide a pattern, and the pattern was unmistakable. 3i Atlas wasn't reacting, it was counting down. The next anomaly came from the photonic layer, the one NASA insisted had been a misinterpretation of lens scatter, except now it returned in the raw data, unchanged and undeniable. At precisely 3:17 UTC, the comet's internal refraction grid realigned itself, not wobbling, not drifting, but locking into a new geometric orientation, a shift of exactly 36 degrees, a perfect 10th of a circle, a design choice, not a cosmic accident. Immediately afterward, the magnetic envelope around the object pulsed once, twice, then stabilized into a narrow band spike that matched no known natural spectrum. The spike was directional. It was aimed at Earth. But NASA's open-source packet, filtered, muted, reduced to noise. The original packet, the one hidden behind internal firewalls, was sharp, coherent, and terrifying. The magnetic spike carried encoded harmonic structure, not language, not symbols, not something readable, but something deliberate, something timed, something anticipating a listener. It was a handshake aimed directly at our planet. NASA's official report left out the orientation, left out the signature, left out the harmonic, and most damning of all, they left out what happened next. As the magnetic spike faded, the core of 3i Atlas illuminated itself again. A pulse, subtle but real, rippling, outward across the internal layers like a heartbeat echoing through steel. But this time, the signal didn't diffuse. It bent, arced, folded inward toward the nucleus in a looping spiral of light. A self-recursive energy collapse. The hallmark of a system preparing to do something. Not radiate, not eject, not flare, initiate. The corrected NASA data showed a quiet, random flicker. The unaltered data showed a perfect symmetry spiral matched to the Fibonacci constant with an error margin of less than 0.003%. Natural objects do not obey mathematical constants at that precision. Machines do. And the final event in the raw feed, the one NASA removed entirely, came exactly 27 seconds after the spiral collapse. A gravitational microflex, so small it barely registered, so precise it couldn't have been random. A controlled ripple in spacetime spreading outward in concentric rings, every ring equidistant, every pulse identical, every echo timed at intervals of 2.4 seconds. It wasn't strong enough to move anything, but it was strong enough to announce itself, like knocking on a door, and the direction of that knock, the vector of its dispersal, was pointed not toward space, not toward Jupiter, not toward the galactic plane, but toward the Sun. NASA's altered version changed the vector by 17 degrees, just enough to make the ripple seem like meaningless noise, but the truth is clear, 3i Atlas wasn't communicating with Earth. It was communicating with the star we orbit, or more chillingly, with something inside it. Whatever NASA removed from the data wasn't an error. It was a warning, one they chose not to share. They thought the modification would go unnoticed. For 40 years, NASA had built a reputation on transparent data logs, every byte time-stamped, archived, mirrored, and redundantly preserved across institutional servers. But the new 3i Atlas dataset didn't match that lineage. The packet headers didn't just shift, they reformatted. An entire 19-second section vanished from the public portal sometime after 03.12 UTC. Not overwritten, not corrupted, replaced. The official update claimed it was compression cleanup. But compression doesn't rewrite signal geometry, it doesn't remove frequency bleed, and it absolutely does not insert a synthetic alias band to hide a missing cycle. Someone had altered the core signal. A senior engineer leaked the truth quietly through encrypted relay. The original capture contained a burst that was not supposed to be there. A spike so foreign it triggered 4 internal security protocols simultaneously. A harmonic pattern. Regular, structured, and completely inconsistent with natural cometry emissions. So the team did the one thing that confirmed suspicion. They ran a reverse check. Public data, smooth curve. Internal data, a jagged harmonic pulse at 15.72 seconds that looked eerily like modulation. The room went silent. No one wanted to say the word, but they felt the weight of it. Communication. The harmonic spike didn't align with rotation, mass flex, ion interaction, or dust collapse. Instead, its frequency matched an earlier pulse from a deep core imaging readout that had been quietly filed away under an internal category marked non-standard anomalies. The same signature appearing twice in unrelated diagnostics. Impossible, unless it was part of a larger system, something with timing, memory, and intent. The modified NASA batch scrubbed the spike entirely, smoothed out the curve, rebuilt the noise floor, and reissued the dataset as final approved. But whoever did the edit made a subtle mistake. They forgot the edge coloration. The original spike produced a halo, a fringe effect where the frequency bled into the surrounding noise bands. The altered version had no halo, proving that it wasn't a natural capture. When independent analysts overlaid the two datasets, the truth emerged instantly. The public release wasn't a correction, it was a concealment. The timing made it worse. Just seconds after the removed spike, 3i Atlas's inner core exhibited a minor but unmistakable spatial reorientation. Not much, just a rotational shiver, a micro-adjustment. But objects drifting through interstellar space do not fine-tune themselves in direct response to signal events. Whatever the original dataset showed, it wasn't noise, it was cause and effect. NASA didn't delete data, NASA deleted context, because if the spike had been allowed to stand unedited, analysts around the world would have drawn the same inevitable conclusion. 3i Atlas wasn't just reacting to solar wind, gravitational pressure, or thermal variation. It reacted to a signal, a pattern, something that touched its internal system enough to make it shift, for only half a second. A natural object does not do that, but a device might. It got worse. Deep inside the raw archive, where nothing was supposed to survive beyond 30 minutes, an unprocessed shadow file appeared. A glitch, a write-through, a forgotten fragment left behind before a technician wiped the system. Inside it, a thin, jagged smear of data exactly where the missing spike would have been. But the smear wasn't noise, not even close. Its structure matched a known mathematical type, nested phase encoding. The same pattern used in encrypted spacecraft transmissions, where timing, not amplitude, carries the message. Someone had tried to bury the clue beneath wavelets and white noise, but whoever sanitized the data underestimated how many layers of residual tracer frequency imprint could leave behind. When reconstructed, the smear revealed 3 distinct pulses, tight, rising, repeating at perfect intervals. The shape mirrored a phenomenon that should not exist in a natural nucleus, the 78-minute internal thermal cycle. One of the earliest, anomalies, one NASA also downplayed. This wasn't 2 different behaviors, it was one system expressing itself through multiple channels, every pulse, every shift, every harmonic, all pieces of a single internal clock, and someone inside NASA had tried to hide the moment the clock ticked louder. But the echo inside the raw module told the real story. During that missing 19 seconds, 3i Atlas wasn't just pulsing energy, it was transmitting. No one knows to what, or why, or whether it was answering a call or sending one. But the modified dataset proves one thing beyond doubt. NASA didn't want the world to see the signal, or the way the object reacted the instant it happened. Because that moment wasn't just an anomaly, it was a decision, and they hid it. Something in the telemetry changed, subtle, so slight that most analysts would have written it off as rounding noise. But the teams watching the live feed from NASA's Deep Sky Relay had already learned a hard truth. 3i Atlas never produced noise. Every fluctuation had meaning. Every drift had structure. And this one was deliberate. The numbers in the metadata didn't shift first. The timestamps did. Not the raw clocks. Those were immutable. It was the correction coefficients, the tiny sub-second offsets NASA applies during long-range transmissions to account for signal stretch. They changed by only 6 decimal places. Too small for a human to notice at a glance. Too perfect to be unchanged by accident. Engineers at Goddard spotted it first. The coefficients weren't random. They were mirrored. Offset values that had always drifted naturally now reflected each other with mathematical symmetry, like someone had folded the data in half. It was as if NASA wanted the signal to erode, to soften, to blur itself into acceptable uncertainty. And the moment they noticed that adjustment, the second anomaly hit. The radar return curves suddenly recompiled with a new algorithm. Not officially, not publicly, automatically. The back-end system, the one NASA never intended the public to see, began compressing one entire band of the 3i Atlas radar reflections, the low-frequency data, the band that reveals depth, shape, core movement. Suddenly the reflection curves flattened. Not enough to erase the anomaly, just enough to make it statistically negligible. But the universe doesn't care about statistical comfort. 3i Atlas kept sending the same impossible signature, the same deep core echo, the same metallic architecture nobody wanted to acknowledge. And despite the attempted compression, the truth forced its way back into view. The anomaly wasn't shrinking. The anomaly wasn't weakening. It was growing, and NASA's quiet alterations were nothing more than a thin sheet of frost over a burning engine. By midnight, the corrected data behaved like a sealed envelope with ink bleeding through the paper. Numbers adjusted, themselves back toward the unfiltered values. Echo strengths climbed to match the original spectrum. Phase drift reappeared in the raw logs, even though the display scripts were programmed to smooth them out. The machine was undoing the edits in real time, as if the truth refused to stay buried. Even the team members who signed the compliance forms couldn't explain it. "Telemetry shouldn't behave like this," one analyst muttered, staring at the returning spikes. "It's not behaving," another said quietly. "It's recovering." At 02:07 UTC, something happened that erased doubt. The reflected pulses jumped by a magnitude so large they bypassed the correction scripts entirely. The mirrors cracked, fabrication layers peeled away. A perfect symmetrical spike, originating from deep within the nucleus, pierced through all filters. NASA resequenced the data pipeline within minutes, a full reconstruction pass, a locked registry shift, a cold restart of the signal interface. But the spike remained. It was like trying to bury an earthquake under wallpaper. 3i Atlas wasn't just resisting suppression, it was pushing back, forcing its internal structure, its timing cycles, its impossible core heat, into the light whether the agency wanted it or not. When the final data dump finished compiling, the truth stood naked in front of them. NASA hadn't corrected the signal. NASA had tried to mute it, and the object had responded by amplifying itself, as if it knew it was being altered, as if it recognized the interference, as if it wanted to be seen. An engineer exhaled sharply. The room was quiet enough to hear the click of her keyboard. "It's aware of the edits," she whispered. "No natural object compensates for filtering. No comet strengthens a signal because we weaken it." Someone else in the room finally said it out loud. "It's communicating, not with us, through us." The correction logs reflected something chilling. As NASA suppressed the depth data, 3i Atlas increased the depth modulation. As NASA smoothed out the thermal pulses, the pulses sharpened. As NASA masked the rotation drift, the drift resolved into crisp, predictable geometry. Every alteration was answered, every answer was deliberate, and the object kept rotating into alignment with Earth during each response cycle, not by chance, not by drift, by intention. Because 3i Atlas didn't just want its true signature visible, it wanted it visible to us. NASA's quiet edits weren't just a reluctance to publish uncomfortable data. They were an attempt to slow down a conversation they didn't initiate, couldn't control, and no longer fully understood. And the conversation wasn't stopping. The noise wasn't noise. The spikes weren't glitches. The corrections weren't mistakes. They were a dialogue. And 3i Atlas had just made its message unmistakably clear. Stop trying to silence me. The shift wasn't supposed to be detectable. According to NASA's official reports, 3i Atlas had shown no significant deviation in its internal density across the previous 48 hours, but the numbers slipped, quietly, subtly, like a fingerprint someone tried to wipe off a glass but didn't quite finish the job. The updated mass report uploaded to the internal Deep Dynamics console was almost identical to the previous entry, except for a decimal that no one was meant to notice, a 0.0038% density reduction. Insignificant on paper, meaningless to the public, but catastrophic to the researchers who understood what that number really meant. 3i Atlas wasn't just changing, it was correcting itself. Something inside the object had altered its own mapped density, precisely enough to be measurable by the most advanced gravitational models on Earth, but subtle enough that someone at NASA tried to bury it in the rounding. Except rounding couldn't hide the pattern. That density drop matched an earlier observation NASA never announced. The internal compression wave detected 2 weeks prior, one that should have crushed the object, but instead was absorbed perfectly, redistributed, and then vanished as if swallowed by a mechanism. Now the same signature was back, only this time the compression wasn't absorbing external force, it was releasing internal mass, like a coil unspooling, like a system shedding weight before activation. And then, at 0317 UTC, the camera arrays detected a microscopic shimmer across the coma, so faint it would have been missed if not for a post-analysis scrub. It wasn't dust, it wasn't crystal, it wasn't light reflection, It was structure. A fleeting hexagonal grid, barely visible, like a pattern projected from inside the core outward through the dust. For a single frame, it locked into perfect symmetry, hung there in the coma's chaotic swirl, and then disintegrated back into randomness. The signal team froze. It matched nothing natural, nothing geological, nothing accidental. A grid inside a comet, a pattern inside chaos. Someone at NASA flagged the anomaly, then quietly deleted the flag, because they recognized it. The hexagonal structure matched the interference lattice NASA had removed from the public release earlier in the week, a section they claimed was corrupted by cosmic rays, even though the internal logs described it differently. Internal synthetic diffraction detected. Pattern indicates artificial periodicity. Someone didn't want that word leaving the building. Artificial. The updated data release omitted the grid, omitted the density shift, omitted the spike in the object's internal resonance. But internally, the truth spread quickly. 3i Atlas wasn't just stabilizing, it was reorganizing, and the pattern wasn't random, it was logical. Symmetry, recursion, feedback, correction. Every adjustment was sharpening the object's internal geometry. Every shift was preparing the core for something. Then came the event no one expected, a brief reversal in the object's dust flow patterns, only milliseconds long, captured by exactly one instrument before the software automatically smoothed the data. That smoothing was the problem. The raw feed showed the reversal. The public-facing telemetry showed nothing. Someone had programmed the error correction software to erase the anomaly before it could appear. Not a malfunction, not corruption, an instruction. The object inhaled, collapsed dust inward, then exhaled, expelled it outward in a perfectly straight line. And NASA's official data didn't show a single frame of it. The engineers who discovered the edit didn't speak for a full 30 seconds. Because the pattern wasn't geological, wasn't thermal, wasn't dynamic. It looked like a signal, a test pulse, a calibration. A way for the object to measure how the dust layer responded to directed energy. The team ran the frame through energy mapping software. The dust pulse formed a grid, a repeating 12-point geometry. It appeared again 9 minutes later, then precisely 9 minutes after that, and again. NASA's public data release? All 3 pulses erased, but not perfectly. Someone missed a pixel layer signature, a lingering echo of the grid. When enhanced, the pattern became unmistakable. It wasn't a burst, it wasn't noise, it wasn't turbulence. It was a mask projected outward from the nucleus and imprinted on the dust like a watermark. 3i Atlas wasn't shedding mass. It was sending templates. It was shaping the environment around itself, like a device calibrating sensors, like a machine preparing its field, like something that expected to receive or emit information and needed a stable environment to do it. Then the gravimetric analysis arrived. That insignificant density reduction, the one NASA wanted buried, wasn't random either. The shift aligned with the dust pulse timing. Mass changed exactly when the dust grid appeared, meaning the object wasn't just mapping space around it, it was tuning its own interior to match the external patterns, like 2 halves of a machine aligning themselves, internal and external, before activation. The internal log said it clearly. Core harmonic sync event recorded. Structure approaching coherence. That line never appeared in the public release. Instead, NASA deleted it, replaced the entire sequence with a line that read, "Telemetry variance detected, investigation pending." But everyone inside the program knew the truth. 3i Atlas wasn't drifting, wasn't tumbling, wasn't passively shedding material. It was syncing, it was preparing, it was correcting itself. And now, pressure sensors detected the impossible. A momentary negative pressure zone inside the dust shell. A vacuum pulse, not outward, inward, pulling dust into itself, mapping it, analyzing it, ejecting it, and then repeating the process, each time more precise, each time more symmetrical. Dust turned into data, gravity turned into a signal, mass turned into an adjustment. Something inside the object was awakening, slowly, carefully, deliberately. And NASA's quiet edits weren't hiding the truth. They were confirming it. Because behind every removed line, every reprocessed dataset, every signal anomaly buried as noise, one quiet fact kept resurfacing. 3i Atlas wasn't behaving like a comet. It was behaving like a device. And now the device was entering the next phase. Its dust pulses aligned, its resonance stabilized, its density corrected, its internal geometry sharpened, its fields synchronized. Everything was pointing to one terrifying conclusion. It wasn't hiding what it was finishing what it came here to do. The final 48 hours of data before NASA's silent revision revealed the one anomaly no one expected. Not a light spike, not a thermal signature, not a spectral distortion, but a reversal in the object's own internal chronology. Every observational network logging 3i Atlas noticed it at the same moment. The timestamps embedded in the raw telemetry no longer aligned with the motion of the object. It was as if the comet were moving in a timeline slightly offset from ours, slipping half a second ahead, then lagging behind, then snapping back into sync like nothing had happened. To most people, this would look like nothing more than a millisecond glitch. But to NASA, it was the smoking gun. A natural body cannot bend its own temporal rhythm, only systems with internal clocks, real clocks, engineered clocks, can desynchronize and then realign by choice. The data was undeniable. At exactly 03:12:49 UTC, 3i Atlas registered a positional shift that mathematically required negative temporal acceleration. A polite scientific way of saying, it moved in a way that cannot happen in real time. Internal memos described it as the temporal echo, a ripple, a shadow of movement that happened before the movement itself. This was the moment NASA locked the original dataset behind tiered access credentials, and then replaced the public version with a corrected one showing a more traditional comet wobble and nothing more. No echo, no desync, no timeline slip. But the truth had already leaked to 3 stations that weren't supposed to see the raw feed, and those stations ran their own analysis. What they found next was even more damning. When they overlaid the timeline slip against the object's electromagnetic pulse logs, a pattern emerged. The desynchronization wasn't random. Every temporal glitch aligned with the one vector. Earth. Not the Sun, not Jupiter, not the galactic plane. Only Earth. Like the object wasn't just passing through, but checking in, measuring, mapping, testing the delay between itself and the clocks we use to track the universe. Why? Because anything trying to communicate across a distance needs to know latency. Anything sending instructions must calculate delay. And anything attempting synchronization must first determine the difference between its own timeline and ours. The more they examined the raw data, the more the horrifying possibility took shape. 3i Atlas wasn't malfunctioning. It was handshaking. The kind of handshake 2 systems perform before exchanging information, before connection, before activation. NASA scrubbed the evidence, replacing the strange temporal spikes with benign orbital deviations. But not before the independent teams realized something haunting. Every time 3i Atlas slipped forward in time, Earth's magnetosphere twitched, a tiny ripple, like a muscle tightening before a reflex, and every time it slipped backward, the ionospheric charge dipped by a precise fraction. Not chaotic, not weather-driven, not solar-driven, synchronized. 2 systems breathing on the same rhythm. Then came the final piece, the one that forced NASA to not only alter the data, but lock entire observation windows behind a security tier reserved for threat analysis. Not from the surface, not from the jets, not from the coma, from the core. A single, perfectly shaped electromagnetic spike aimed directly at Earth. Not wide, not diffused, narrow, focused, directed, and encoded. The pulse carried a harmonic profile identical to the temporal echo signatures, as if the object had just sent a timestamp of its own internal clock toward Earth. Not noise, not radiation, a synchronization request, the kind spacecraft send before docking, before linking, before merging 2 systems into one channel. NASA did not announce this. NASA did not publish it. NASA did not even acknowledge the existence of the pulse. Instead, the public dataset shows a thermal reflection and nothing else. But the pulse happened, the temporal echo happened, the desync happened, and all of them point to the same conclusion. 3i Atlas wasn't hiding. It wasn't running. It wasn't observing. It was calling. And the unanswered question, the one NASA buried beneath revised numbers, corrected coordinates, and deliberately flattened data, is simple. Calling who? Or worse, calling what? For 12 hours the numbers didn't make sense. Not to the telemetry teams, not to the orbital analysts, and not to the internal audit division that first flagged the inconsistency. But NASA didn't retract the data, they modified it. Quietly, precisely, and in a way that only someone watching frame by frame, second by second could ever notice. Because the change didn't appear in the raw feed. It appeared in the official timestamp, the one sent to the public-facing servers, the one mirrored by every university across the world, the one used by ESA and JAXA to synchronize analysis, a shift of 0.842 seconds. Not much, barely noticeable. But in the language of interstellar object tracking, that's not a clerical error. That's an admission that something happened during that time, something they didn't want anyone to see. The internal brief described it blandly as a signal correction offset, but the actual trace, the one NASA didn't publish, told a very different story. During that missing fraction of a second, 3i Atlas didn't brighten, flare, eject material, or rotate. It stopped. Not slowed, not drifted. It stopped. A complete arrest of motion in the inertial frame, something no natural body in a gravity well can do. The telemetry spike showed a moment where velocity dropped to near zero, where the coma flattened, where the tail folded inward like an organism pausing to inhale. Then the object resumed motion as if nothing had happened. NASA edited that moment out, but they couldn't edit the consequences, because 2 minutes after the timestamp shift something else happened, something even stranger. The deep-range Doppler monitors at Goldstone picked up a returning echo that did not match Earth's transmitted beam. A distorted tone, structured, tight band, a response, exactly 1.1 seconds long, a duration so precise it couldn't be noise. But instead of announcing a potential two-way signal, NASA reclassified the echo as an instrument bounce, a claim that collapsed instantly when independent researchers replicated the anomaly using their own arrays. The truth was simple. 3i Atlas had generated its own return tone, and NASA cut the timestamp so the public models wouldn't line up with it. But time doesn't lie. Not cosmic time, not signal time, not the kind of time an object uses when it pauses mid-flight like a machine entering a new mode. Because the moment NASA tried to erase that sub-second gap was exactly when 3i Atlas shifted from passive drift to active behavior. And in the hours that followed, the evidence grew harder to ignore. The object's shadow angle changed by 304 degrees, too sudden to be thermal, its magnetic footprint inverted for 600 milliseconds, too structured to be random. Its forward coma tightened, too symmetrical to be natural. It was the same pattern seen in artificial stabilization systems. Something inside the object turned on. NASA's silence wasn't surprising. They'd been expecting a moment like this, a point where the object's behavior forced a choice. Admit the anomaly publicly, or control the narrative until a larger picture emerged. They chose control, so they edited the timestamps, they corrected the light curves, and they delayed the release of thermal data long enough to blend the spike into a broader curve. But what they couldn't hide, what no agency on Earth could hide, was the shift in trajectory, a correction so precise it looked like a course update. Not a drift, not a wobble, a decision. Because the object didn't just shift toward the Sun or Jupiter or some random gravitational path. It shifted toward Earth. Not enough to trigger alarms, not enough to predict collision, but enough to draw a line of intent. And the moment NASA saw that line, they made their second quiet modification. They changed the public ephemeris, just slightly, a correction of 0.0035 AU in the long-term projection. Again, barely noticeable, unless you were looking. Because the updated path removed one thing, the point where the object and Earth's orbital plane would have intersected. A crossover that wasn't a collision, wasn't a threat, but was exactly the kind of alignment needed for a directed signal, or a scan, or a calibration pass. In other words, an encounter, not physical, not catastrophic, informational. The kind of alignment that matters to a machine trying to read, map, or measure a planet as it passes through the inner system. And NASA erased it from the projection. But the universe doesn't care about projections. The object kept drifting into the alignment anyway. Every hour brought it closer to the plane. Every micro-correction tightened the approach. Every stabilized rotation made it clearer. It was preparing for something. And the silence from NASA became louder than the data they released. Radial density anomalies went unmentioned. Polarization patterns were mislabeled. Magnetometer disruptions were tagged as solar interference during periods with no solar activity. But the people watching, the independent researchers, the deep space hobbyists, the gravitational analysts, they all saw the pattern. They all recognized the behavior, because natural objects don't erase timestamps. Natural objects don't answer radio pulses. Natural objects don't halt motion for fractions of a second. Natural objects don't fly with precision. Natural objects don't target alignments. Machines do. Guided systems do. Objects with instructions do. The change NASA didn't announce wasn't a number. It was the moment 3i Atlas stopped being a mystery and started being a message they weren't ready to explain. But the object itself, it doesn't care who's ready. It's still moving, still stabilizing, still aligning. And whatever happens next, NASA won't be able to edit it out. The change wasn't subtle anymore. It wasn't buried in telemetry logs or tucked between redacted frame captures. It was visible now. Visible in the way every system monitoring 3i Atlas began to drift out of sync, as if the object had quietly rewritten the rules the instruments depended on. It started with the neutrino flux. For months, the flux pattern had been jagged, inconsistent, fractured by the strange metallic layering buried deep inside the nucleus. But now, every reading converged. Lines that once danced in chaotic scatterplots tightened into a single thick band. Uniform, predictable, almost mechanical. Something inside 3i Atlas had stabilized. Not because NASA fixed the data, not because the sensors improved, but because the object itself had changed. And that's when the second anomaly appeared. Every deep space radar sweep aimed at the nucleus returned with a perfect sine wave at its base. A clean mathematical curve nested beneath the noise, as if 3i Atlas had started packaging the echoes, formatting them, giving them structure. The engineers reviewing the data didn't speak at first. They didn't need to. Everyone saw it. Everyone knew. Natural objects do not organize their own signal returns. Yet 3i Atlas had done exactly that. And NASA hadn't announced any of this. Not the shift, not the harmonic, not the convergence. Instead, overnight, the public database logs were edited. The raw files replaced with smoother curves, clipped at the edges, as if someone wanted the world to believe the data had always been cleaner, simpler, quieter. But the observers, those who watched the object live, hour by hour, they recognized the fingerprints of the edit. The timestamps didn't match. The compression artifacts weren't natural. Frames were replaced. Not corrected. Replaced. That's when the third event hit. At 03:11 UTC, the L2 relay station registered a spike in mid-band radio noise so strong it tripped an emergency shutoff. Not because it was dangerous, because it contained structure. The waveform had symmetry, repetition, timing, a call and response embedded into the static like a heartbeat inside thunder. But that wasn't the shocking part. The shocking part was the direction. The signal wasn't coming from the tail. It wasn't coming from the jets. It wasn't scattering through the coma. It was coming from the core, directly from the central region NASA had edited out of its public logs just 12 hours earlier. And then the worst confirmation arrived. The Deep Space Network cross-checked the spike and found a perfect mirrored pulse returning from the opposite side of the solar windshell. A reflection, a reply, a two-way communication channel hidden inside telemetry noise. Who was sending the reply? Where was it bouncing from? No one answered. Not publicly, not privately. Instead, yet another correction appeared in the dataset. NASA scrubbed the twin pulse pattern, replacing it with a benign cosmic ray burst profile, the kind they've used for decades whenever they don't want people asking deeper questions. But the truth was already out. The pulse wasn't cosmic, it wasn't random, it wasn't thermal, it wasn't magnetic, it was mathematical, a pattern, a signature, a handshake, and it wasn't the first time it had happened. Buried in the older unaltered logs, those still preserved in independent observatories, the same reply pulse appeared, during the exact same alignment every 26 hours, timed with the so-called wobble correction NASA claimed was a mere processing error. It wasn't an error, it was synchronization. 3i Atlas wasn't just stabilizing, it wasn't just pulsing, It wasn't just behaving like a machine. It was listening, testing, measuring, waiting for alignment, waiting for the moment when Earth, the solar wind, and the object formed the perfect geometric triangle. And every time they did, the reply arrived. The truth became impossible to ignore. NASA didn't alter the data to hide noise. They altered it to hide consistency. Because consistency means intention. And intention means 3i Atlas isn't a rogue fragment drifting through space. It's a system that reacts, a system that corrects, a system that communicates. And now, with the data shifting faster than the edits can be applied, with independent observatories posting their own untouched readings, with the object's internal pulses tightening into a near-perfect harmonic sequence, NASA's silence is no longer caution, it's fear. Because anomaly after anomaly has collapsed into a single pattern, 3i Atlas isn't showing us random behaviors, it's revealing an internal process, a staged progression, a countdown. And if the corrected logs are hiding anything, if the timing edits are intentional, if the missing frames are deliberate, it's because the final stage has already begun, and someone, somewhere, doesn't want the world to know what comes next. For 3 full minutes, no one spoke. NASA, ESA, JAXA. Even the classified spectrograph team at Ascension sat motionless as the final data sweep rendered across the composite feed. It wasn't the numbers that froze them, it was the absence of numbers. The object that had once behaved like a comet, then a machine, then a message, had stopped behaving altogether. Not in the way a rock stops drifting, not in the way an engine shuts down, not in the way a signal fades into silence. This was different. The entire telemetry grid fell into a dead zone exactly 0.04 seconds after the last rotational signature. No heat, no magnetic bleed, no photonic scattering, no gravitational twitch, no dust, nothing. 3i Atlas hadn't turned off. It had gone blind on purpose. The blackout wasn't random, it wasn't chaotic, it wasn't a glitch. It was surgically clean, like the object had dropped a curtain over itself. But sensors at L2 picked up something else, something subtle and terrifying. Not output, but intake. The vacuum around the object registered a microdrop in particle density. Like the object was inhaling the surrounding space, drawing in ions, photons, even subatomic drift, compressing them into itself. A collapse without destruction, a contraction without heat. Something inside 3i Atlas was folding in, tightening, preparing. The outer coma evaporated in seconds. The tail snapped inward like a ribbon pulled tight. The jets froze in mid-oscillation as if suspended by invisible scaffolding. Even the magnetic anchor, once pinned like a stake in the solar wind, disappeared without dispersion. Then the object shifted. Not forward, not backward, not sideways. It shifted dimensionally. A thin outline, barely visible to the naked eye, rippled across its surface. A shimmer like the edge of heated metal overlapping with itself in 2 directions at once. Space flexed around the object. Stars behind it blurred into elongated streaks. Trajectory plots collapsed into 0 returning coordinates. Every telescope on Earth and in orbit failed simultaneously. Not because they were overwhelmed, but because they had nothing left to see. 3i Atlas had folded itself into a shape that physics didn't have a slot for, and then, in the dead, silent vacuum, where the object should have been, where the blackout data should have ended, one more thing appeared. A signal, short, sharp, deliberate. 3 pulses, a pause, 1 pulse, a pause, 2 pulses, not random, not noise, not artifact. It was the same sequence that marked the first internal anomaly, the same signature embedded in its core structure, the same rhythm that matched thermal cycles, magnetic anchors, jet reversals, photonic bands, and gravitational pulses. The object wasn't dying, it wasn't shutting down, it wasn't leaving, it was marking completion. Completion of what? No one dared say out loud. The pulse spread outward at light speed, passing through the solar system like a quiet, invisible tide. Satellites flickered when it touched them. Pulsars drifted by nanoseconds. Even Voyager 1, so far beyond the sun's influence it should have been deaf, registered a faint echo. Then the signal faded. No return signature, no trail, no radiation wake, just silence. A silence that felt intentional. NASA didn't publish the final relay. They didn't alert the public. They didn't brief the press. They locked the data behind the highest classification tier and erased the raw feeds from the central server. But every researcher who saw the last packet knew the same truth. 3i Atlas hadn't been altered. It hadn't been corrupted. It hadn't been misread. NASA changed the data because the original version said something they were not ready to face. The object was never drifting. It was never lost. It was never observing. The entire time, 3i Atlas had been completing an internal sequence, and that sequence didn't end with disappearance. It ended with a message, a simple, chilling mathematical inscription encoded in the residual pulse, 010103030508 on 13, a Fibonacci ladder, an unfinished sequence, a countdown, or a beginning. Because whatever 3i Atlas activated inside itself, whatever it masked behind the blackout, whatever it carried into that silent fold, it isn't gone. It's waiting. And when the sequence reaches its next threshold, every device still listening will hear it, whether we're ready or not.